Hi, everyone. And for the sake of the recording, for those people who are not joining us today, I'm Ray Poynter from NewMR, and I'm joined by Geoff Lowe, Executive Director at Infotools. Hi, Geoff.
Hey, Ray, good to be back with you, having another fireside chat.
We've got a provocative statement here that I'm going to lead off with. You believe that we need to completely rethink how we generate understanding for good things to be done to our clients' business. What have you got in mind when you're thinking about that?
Well, I think that there is an assumption when some research is done that the best way, or the only way for the fruits of the labor of the researcher to get into the hands of the client is for a report to be written and shared. And I think that assumption needs to be challenged. I mean, the research that you've done, I think, shows that both the creators of reports, the researchers, and the receivers have the same or engage with each other with that same basic assumption. I'm going to pay, as a client, I'm going to pay a researcher to do some research for me after I give them the brief. They will design a survey, they'll field it, they'll do the analysis, they'll find the insights, and they will share it with me in a report. A report that could be verbal, a verbal report. It could be supported by a PowerPoint deck, a Word document, any tangible asset. And I receive it and I absorb it. Now, the problem with that is that it's a one-way flow of information from the holder of information to the recipient of information without an implied dialogue. And what I think we need to do is go back to first principles and say, what is it that the client really wants to spend money on research for? It's to gain understanding about their world, the world that they care about, so that they can do good things in their business. And I am asking the question, I think we need to ponder this carefully, is the reporting process I just described the best way to generate that understanding from research?
So do you think the report is a barrier rather than an enabler?
Yeah, I actually think the report can be a barrier. In fact, some of the comments made in response to the survey, I think actually bear that out. There were comments, in fact, there were several comments I noticed where the problem with the report was it was too long. It was too long and I didn't have time to get into it. It was too long and it didn't get to the issue. There was too much data, not enough of a story. So in that regard, there is, well, let's just assume that there is inherent value in the research that these report receivers, these clients are grizzling about. That inherent value has not managed to get through. And so in that regard, and the report, I think, is implicated in that failure for the understanding, the value to get through. And I believe that the solution to it lies not just in the report creators, the researchers, approaching this differently. I think the clients also need to have a different expectation of how they're going to get the results from their research.
If we want to take that expectation, what do we need to change at the client end? And then what do we need to change in terms of what we supply?
So at the client end, and I'm glad you asked the question this way, because I think it's really important that that we don't see the reporting of research results as a dialogue, as a monologue, but as a dialogue. In other words, the clients, the report receivers, have a role to play in this too. That they need to expect that there is work that they need to do in order for this understanding to be unearthed from the research. In other words, if a client goes into an engagement with an agency believing that they're going to give the brief, and the next thing that's going to happen is that all this value is going to be delivered in a report, they have that wrong. I think the client's expectation has to be, I'm going to engage with this researcher as a partner of mine, and together we are going to go on a journey to reach an understanding. And then from the researcher's point of view, I think that it's incumbent on the researchers to expect that their clients will come along on that journey with them. If the researchers has that expectation from the start, I think it's more likely that the clients are going to buy into it. In fact, they will prefer to engage with a researcher that has that expectation of them, and the client is going to get immersed in the data and the finding of the insights and the generating of the understanding, and in the process of being part of finding out that this, generating the insights, it's going to mean so much more to them, and they'll own it more, and they'll be much more able to share the findings and the understanding from a position of genuine understanding than if they just read a report and passed the report on to their colleagues. So two-way street.
So when we say the client, who are we thinking about? Because if we shift all this report writing from being done by several agencies to a really small group of insight professionals on the client side, won't we just replicate the problem but make it worse?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're describing is you move the boundary between the creator and the receiver from between the agency and the client to between the researcher within the client and their internal stakeholders. Absolutely. I think there's several scenarios that we could cover here, but if you imagine that there is a company is big enough to have a team of insights professionals, so that they've got their own researchers in-house, they are going to be commissioning research from a number of different agencies and possibly doing some in-house stuff themselves. The engagement that they must have with the research agency has to be just as iterative, as interactive, as two-way dialogue as the conversation that they then must have with their internal stakeholders. So the dynamic I'm describing, I think, is just as important from within the company to out as it is within the company. So there must be no shifting of that problem from external to internal. The internal researchers must play the role of the report creators that we're kind of assuming that is really the domain of the research agencies. And if you've got a company that's too small to have some internal researchers themselves, then the agency is going to be engaging with brand owners, marketing people, similar sorts of roles. And then it is incumbent on them to also be part of the process so that they can share and get that understanding. If a marketing person, they gain understanding, they make some decisions and then act on those decisions. If they are making decisions and taking actions in their business that have come from their own personal investigative process in the data, the research, the insights, they're going to be in so much better position to be sharing that with other stakeholders, people who have to agree to the actions, and then those good actions are much more likely to happen. And the research is much more likely to be considered to have high value within the business. And I think as an industry, we all want that.
So one of the traditional comments that comes up when we talk about democratizing insights, about empowering more people in the organization is, what happens if they get it wrong? They don't have necessarily the background in analyzing data and things like, well, that's a really small sample size. You shouldn't really trust that. That's
I've heard that pushback for a long time, Ray. It's the implicit in that position is that I don't trust you to do the right thing. And fair enough too. Market research is inherently complex at times, right? There are things that you kind of have to know in order to not do the wrong thing with research data. But the antidote to that is not to leave the non-researchers out of the conversation and just say, leave this to me. I've got this covered. Hold my beer. And I'll do the report and I'll give it to you and you'll read it and you'll have everything you need. That's not the answer. The answer is to engage with them. So in other words, you're not just going to let them loose and have them do the investigation on their own. I'll guide you. I'll make sure that if you find something and you want to check that, is this an insight? Is this genuine? I'll help you through that. getting into our heads that reporting should be replaced with dialogue, with an iterative process of learning and gaining understanding, I think is the answer to that age-old pushback that they'll shoot themselves in the foot. If you don't give that to them, they'll hurt themselves.
So thinking about the study that NewMR have just conducted, we've got over 1,000 interviews from 2 waves of data collection. Is there anything in there that gives any hints about how we might tackle this, or what people are looking for when you loaded the system into Harmony and you had a look at it yourself?
Yeah, look, I think there is, but I said early on that I like to go back to first principles and ask the question, what is it that we are collectively trying to achieve when market research is done? Going back to first principles, we're trying to generate understanding. And if we accept that, and I assert it, I wonder if maybe we're asking the wrong question in this research, because the question kind of presupposes that a report, however you define it, and I'm happy to define it if you want me to, is part of the process. And there seems to be an assumption, as I said earlier, that that report is a one-way flow of information, a monologue, if you will. So what I got out of looking at that research is everybody, the report creators, the report receivers, is kind of locked in this self-limiting loop. And in order to get out of that, in order to break out, in order to really grow the total value that can be created by market research, we have to throw away that assumption that the report is the way to do it, and start talking about, as I say, that growing understanding with investigating as opposed to analysing. So looking at the data and have with a question, seeing an answer to that question, and having that answer raise another question and keep on going. And do that together with the people let's just call it for simplicity, the client side, who have all of the knowledge of their brands and their customers and their competitors. Combine that with the researcher, the people who hopefully understand what the client is trying to achieve here, but also understand what has been done in the research and what the strengths and perhaps the limits are of the research, so that with these two sets of skills and knowledge and prior experience, you can come up with some new understandings that would otherwise not have been reached. So if I was to do the research again, Ray, I would actually avoid asking about what do you think of reports. I would ask, what do you think about the way that the value generated from the research has been disseminated in your organization? And if a report comes, as part of the answer, that's fine. But if we pose a different question, we will get to a different answer. And that's what I think we need to do.
Some of the time when clients commission a project, what they want are answers to questions. Mm-hmm. In those situations, if we give them the ability to find answers themselves, they may not be that impressed if they've actually gone to a consultancy, an agency for a recommendation. Is there a difference between a data set and where we're looking to provide recommendations, directions, and that could be about a business feature, but it might be what are the right personas that we should use to reflect this marketplace? And one can see why that would be a relatively specialized field. Mm-hmm. And the agency would need to do more than hand over the data, I feel.
Yep. And so just to be clear, simply handing over the data is not the answer either. But look, I'll get back to that, because the first part of your question was on if a client simply wants answers to questions. In other words, they're just looking for facts. I just want to know, how many people prefer my brand compared to my competitor's brand. And there's a relatively simple connection between understanding that fact and an action that I've already hypothesized as what is going to happen. I'm going to do this. If the data shows me this, then this is what I'm going to do. Finding out facts like that is relatively straightforward. In fact, I would argue, and some cases, you don't need a researcher to help you with that. If it's good enough and it comes fast enough, then that's going to do the trick. That's different to a more exploratory, the sorts of research that you might do if you're exploring a potential new market for a new product. And I think this is where you were going with the question, where you really need to get a full understanding of this part of the world. And you're not going to do that just by finding out facts and having those facts shared in a report. Here's the percentage of people who prefer this brand over that. It needs to be much more thought through survey methodology and questionnaire, and you need to think about what are the ways that we can actually find this out. And it might not just be a questionnaire, there might be lots of other things that you want to do. In fact, I think researchers need to be open to some of the best ways to answer some of these questions or to gain understanding is from sources other than just asking people questions. Asking people questions, I think, will always be around. I think there's sometimes you just have to ask a question to find out what is the next best thing to do, right? But I think if you differentiate between those two things, simply finding out facts, getting the data, and giving that data to somebody, even a naive person, is probably just going to be fine. But needing to go into more depth to get a fuller understanding of what's going on in the world, I think that's where collaboration, partnership, working together to grow understanding is absolutely necessary.
So just coming back briefly now to the study itself, what sort of things did you glean that might be interesting that people might want to look at in the context of what you've just been saying about the shifts and the changes?
Yeah, it's hard to say whether I got this specifically from the research, and I think I probably did, but it is also something that I've believed for a long time, and that is that in order for the clients to get the best return on their investment, they have to be prepared to be part of the process. Now, this is something I mentioned earlier, and some of the comments that came through, and there was a question there, what made the report, the most recent report that they were answering questions about, good, and what made the report bad. There was this sense from the clients that that the report creators are there to serve, and my role in this is simply to be served. So, in fact, it was quite. If you have a look at the open-enders and you filter it by creators versus receivers, I'm sure you've done this in Harmony. The contrast and tone of the responses is stark, and look, I'm putting a lot of the onus on the clients here, not just the researchers. The tone that I'm paying the money. I don't have to work. I haven't got time. That sense, I think, is it's false economy. Because with a little bit of investment of time, which of course, time is money, but a little bit of investment of my time as a client is going to reap a tremendous reward in terms of the higher level of understanding that I'm going to get if I invest in this, as opposed to divesting the whole responsibility for finding everything out to the researcher. Find it all out, please, and then just give it to me. So I know that on the face of it, looking at your executive summary and your excellently written report, Ray, I think it's tempting to go, look, the researchers are deluded here. They all think they write brilliant reports, and the report that the clients don't think they're that great. I think that, and that it's easy to say, well, hey, it's the researchers have to get their act together. The reality is that the clients have a huge role to play in that, because they cannot simply be the passive actors in this if they are really going to get the value out of research.
We're just about to go to Q&A, but if somebody wanted to look at exactly those things, how would they access this data in Harmony? I believe you set something up for us.
Yeah, well, all of the data from the two waves, so there was the 2019 and the 2021 waves, has been set up into Harmony, and we're happy to give anybody watching this access to that in Harmony. All you'd need to do is, in fact, email me. Geoff, Geoff, at Infotools, Infotools.com, Geoff@infotools.com. If you email me, I will make sure that we give you the right level of access for the sorts of things that you want to achieve.
Great. With that, let's go to see what the Q&A is like.